Yeah, we'll do the. Excuse me, could you guys? Thank you. It being 30, I'm going to call this joint meeting of the Select Board and Planning Board to order. And could we open with the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thought I saw Evan. Oh, there he is. Evan, do you want to make any introductory remarks?
I don't think that's necessary.
Okay.
I would just suggest we turn the presentation over to Melissa Robbins.
Okay, you're on, Melissa.
Good evening, members of the board. I want to thank the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen and Evan and Paul for putting together this meeting. I appreciate your time. I know we're getting to holiday time, so I appreciate everybody having an extra meeting. I believe with you at the board this evening is Mark Bransky, excuse me. I think that we have a presentation that we can bring up, and I don't know who's in control of the meeting, but we would need to share, or Evan, are you going to share the slides?
No, it's tied into Chelmsford Telemedia on my computer. We're all set.
Oh, great. Yes, if you want to start that, I'll turn over to Mark to start.
Do you want me to start with? Do you want me to start with the traffic document or the presentation?
If you don't mind.
The presentation, please.
Okay, and you'll need to go to where the microphone is at the podium, or you can sit in one of the seats here.
Good evening, and thank you all for your time, members of the public, members of the various boards here. We'll use the presentation that is now on the screen to kind of create some guidance. The purpose of this meeting was to start to provide information on the consultants' reports that we've released to give the Select and Planning Board's context for the impacts of our proposed project. I think our first couple slides are maybe a little duplicative in that we have gone over this in the past, but I'll just reiterate the development team. I think it's slide 4. Next one, yeah. We are partnering with Choice. They will be carving out a piece of the parcel for development of their housing. They're engaging Icon Architecture. We're using TAT. Civil, we're using Allen Major, and they're using CHA, although broadly speaking, much of the overall civil package will be performed by A&M in coordination with CHA. The general contractor, we self-perform our work, so Trammell Crow Construction will be performing the construction for our part of the development, and Delbrook will for Choice. Legal, as you know, we have Melissa from Farrell Robbins. We also have Nutter McLennan Fish assisting us, and Choice has KGB Partners. I'm referring to 2 other members of our team, particularly because they're salient in this presentation. MDM Transportation Consultants of Westford, who I see on the screen, is our traffic consultant and will be presenting on traffic impacts. And then for fiscal and school child impact, we have Fougere Planning and Development. And they'll be, I don't think they're on quite yet, but they'll be jumping on shortly. If we could go to the page 6 of the deck. So this, as everyone I think knows, is the site that we're discussing. And as noted, there is existing access to Route 3A. That access point kind of ties directly in or tees right into Bruyette Street. And then there is an existing emergency access at the back of the site. And we will basically be retaining both of those points with some qualifications for the access point off Augusta Way. The next slide, again, gives a little context for the structures that were already on the property, most of which I think you're all very familiar with. These 4 buildings have been demolished, and I know members of the Select and Planning Boards had the opportunity to visit the site over the past couple weeks, and I see some of you who did attend, so I think you've seen that the buildings have been demolished. To try to create some context, we did stake out the corners of the buildings as we've envisioned them right now in our site plan, and then we did some tape to show building kind of dimensions. I think it was maybe a little hard in terms of context because it's just, tape and stakes in the midst of fields. But we can revisit that and kind of walk through where the buildings are. We have refined our proposed site plan a bit. If you go to the next slide, this was our original site plan, and you'll note that the Choice building is really at the entrance to the site. So kind of in between our access road and effectively our lot line of Whiteman Street. Again, a 3-story elevator with 54 age-restricted units. In working with our our design team and Choice's civil and design teams, we really didn't feel that this building, with its slight radius and its articulation in the building, made a lot of sense there. And so if you'll go to the next slide, what we're now proposing is that we move the Choice building a bit more onto the site. And frankly, it's going to follow the radius of the access road, which I think makes a lot more sense from just a planning perspective. And then the townhomes, we're more or less flip-flopping the Choice structure with the townhomes. I think that feels a bit better, and I think it makes a bit more sense. It doesn't change any of the numbers of the site. It's really more about just trying to make things work well. And we can certainly discuss that and our reasoning behind it if anyone would like later. The next page is a page that we have distributed to the town in the past, and it's just a summary of the different products that will be on the site, including Choice's development. This is probably here more as a reminder than anything. I'd be glad if people want to discuss this mix, but we've already kind of discussed it. I just wanted to provide it more for context in case anybody had further questions. If not, we can go to the consultant reports summaries tab. And what I'd like to do is ask Bob Michaud from MDM Transportation Consultants to jump in and walk through the report that he submitted earlier this week.
Thank you, Mark. For the record, Robert Michaud. I serve as the managing principal and president of MDM Transportation Consultants based in Marlborough, Massachusetts. Our firm has conducted a preliminary traffic impact and access study for this particular development and walked the board through some of the key findings of that, beginning with the premise that the site and what we studied really were the gateways or the endpoints on either side of the site, which are signalized at Route 4 on one side and Wood Street on the other, and of course the Briette and Site Drive location, which is central to the property. That's shown in this aerial diagram with the red dots, so to speak. We know that within this area, and the next slide really shows this fairly well, is that the site is well served by a system of sidewalks that allow for pedestrian connectivity and options to locations like the plaza, the Demoulas Plaza, just to the east of the property, which is within a 10-minute walk of the property, as well as public transportation lines operated by the Lowell Regional Transit Authority, which include along the Princeton Street corridor, Route 17, and an additional route along the Middlesex Street corridor. Again, both located within 10-minute walk of the site. Provides a very good alternative means of transportation for residents in this particular neighborhood and this particular site. The site itself, we've evaluated using industry standards. So the next slide presents a snapshot of what we anticipate traffic generation would be for the property among the various housing types that include apartments, age-restricted housing, and townhomes. And we arrive at this using, again, industry standard trip rates applied to each of those land use categories, in total 394 units. Directionally speaking, a snapshot in time during a typical commuter period in the morning would have about 100 vehicles leaving this property and using regional highway systems to get to workplaces generally. And that same trend reversed in the evening, which is the second row here, coming back into the site. When we look at how those trips might be oriented to the local street system to get to those regional highway connections and employment centers, The next slides actually show what that looks like. And just to orient, the central portion of this stick figure is where the site is located. The signals on either side of Princeton Street, one on the North Road Route 4 to the west, and Wood Street to the east are shown with colored circles. This snapshot really represents the traffic volume conditions at those locations in the morning that would accommodate those 100 directional trips outbound in the morning. And you'll see that the higher percentage of trips are actually oriented to the west, to the Route 4 connector, which eventually leads to the Drum Hill Rotary, as you know. We would expect that if one were standing at the driveway itself, to see about 55 cars an hour making a left, or about one vehicle per minute, whereas right turns are about 45 vehicles per hour, or about one vehicle every minute or two. So we're not talking about an extraordinarily high number of trips, because they are being split east versus west and eventually north and south. Likewise, in the subsequent slide, the next slide, there's a representation of what those volumes look like in the weekday evening peak hour, and they're similar trends. So in other words, if we were to look at the signals at either end of Princeton Street, we would see about a 2 to 3% change in overall volume. It's not extraordinarily high, and it's certainly not enough to represent what we would call a material impact or change to how those signals work. We've evaluated quantitatively what kind of additional delays might be created by doing a capacity analysis of those endpoints, those signals, and it's known as a level of service analysis, and that's kind of a report card grading system, if you will, that would indicate the amount of delay that currently exists or that might exist once a project is built. And we've done that for both the morning and evening hours. As a point of reference, anything level of service D or better is good and acceptable to normal conditions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and are consistent with industry standards. In this particular instance, as we look at the westerly location, the Route 4 signal, that's at level of service B overall. The driveway itself is at level of service B, and the Wood Street signal to the east is at level of service C. So we know that there's ample capacity to accommodate the relatively modest traffic that might be generated by this development during those peak hours. The next slide is a representation of that same information for the weekday evening peak hour, again in a report card type format, a level of service format, and you'll see very similar results with slightly higher delays at Wood Street, where it's at level of service D, and we'll continue to work at level of service D once the project comes online. So there is ample capacity here to accommodate the site, the property. The next slide really recaps the principal findings of our study, and what we've determined is that there is a number of ways to provide alternative transportation options for the property. We know that in this particular neighborhood setting that about 17% of residents within the census tract currently use alternative transportation options as part of their commute. That could include the LRTA, for instance, public transportation, walking or biking, even carpooling. That there is limited impact to the roadways that surround the property, and that there is no change in the levels of service or operations that we've evaluated at those locations along Princeton Street. Pedestrian and bicycle accommodations will be provided as a part of the project that connect the buildings to the public sidewalk system that exists here. And it's an extensive sidewalk system indeed. And there will be improvements to the driveway itself that include a new crossing, pedestrian crossing, that leads from the site to that sidewalk system that will be equipped with a rapid rectangular flashing beacon, an RRFB, to ensure proper visibility and safety. And finally, there'll be, of course, bike racks and other bicycle amenities that would accommodate visitors and residents alike at the property. The driveway, finally, will be designed to meet applicable safety-based criteria, including sight lines and geometric layout that allows for proper access and circulation by emergency vehicles and delivery vehicles. So, in conclusion, adequate capacity, means of alternative transportation, applicable safety standards and criteria will be met. And with that, I will hand it back to Mark.
Thank you, Bob. I don't know how we want to proceed with this. Would we like to open to questions regarding traffic at this point and then move on to the other items, or would you like to wait towards the end?
Whatever you want.
This is top of mind. Maybe this is easier to.
Traffic as it was presented.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pardon?
They're suggesting we ask questions as you present it, so
Okay.
questions on traffic?
I'm fine with that.
Maybe I'll just go around. Paul?
I think I'm good with it.
Nancy? None? Henry?
No, I've got other questions for later.
Mike?
No questions on traffic.
Tim?
I have no questions on traffic.
Ken?
No, I tend to believe the studies. They proved true on Grist Mill, which we really questioned, and those were right. So I
Okay.
tend to give credence to these studies. They seem to know what they're doing.
And I see Deirdre Connolly in the Zoom room. Deirdre, do you have any questions?
No, I do not, Virginia.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you on that. portion.
Hang on one second. Paul or Evan,
Sorry.
do you want to add anything? Okay. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, thank you very much. If we can then move to the next slide, which is a summary of the fiscal impacts report. Just a few details on that before I let Mark Fougere dig in. He has been able to touch on some of the subjects. He's not necessarily spoken with everyone in town, particularly on the school child, although we think we're pretty triangulated on school child impact. So there are some items that will need to be vetted further, but I think the summary is accurate and gives a good picture of the fiscal impacts of the project. With that, I'll open to Mark.
Thank you. For the record, Mark Fougere, Fougere Planning Development. I'll be working on the fiscal impact report as stated.
Excuse
I'm in the
me,
middle of the
Mark?
report, right? Yes.
If you're in the Zoom room and you're not speaking, it would help Chelmsford Telemedia if you could turn your video off. Go ahead, Mark. No, Mark, you can keep yours on. You're speaking.
Too many marks.
Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you. So I'm working on the fiscal impact report. I haven't completed it, as Mark mentioned, but I'm in the middle of it. We do have some conclusions that we can present this evening, and basically a fiscal impact report looks at revenues that come in community, which I'll go over right now, and then we look at what type of impacts the new use will have on specific departments. In this particular case, we'll be concentrating in the schools, the police and fire department. I do have meetings scheduled very soon with the fire department and the school department, and I'm sure the police department very soon. So to start off, one of the principal things we look at, obviously, is what type of revenue this development's going to generate. The site has been purchased from the state, so it's now on the tax rolls and is assessed at approximately $2.4 million and generates $38,000 in the state that it's in. Based on the market in the area, working with the applicant, we're estimating about $1 million in property taxes based on what we believe will be the assessments from these various different apartment complexes, the 4-story walk-up, the 4-story elevator building, the 3-story walk-up, the townhomes, and then there's a pilot agreement with choice of $12,000 a year. So we're looking at property taxes of $1,086,000 a year. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of the revenue streams that are available from this development. The community has a 1.5% surcharge for CPA, which generates a modest amount of money of $16,000 a year we're estimating based on the taxes that we're going to see. The other big revenue stream that we're estimating is excise taxes. Based on the various types of buildings, we're estimating values of the vehicles that will be occupied by those buildings with this population. So we're estimating another $779,000 a year from excise taxes from this development at build-out. And next slide, please. So in total, between property taxes, the CPA revenues, and the excise taxes, we're estimating annually $1,281,000 in revenue to the community from this development on an annual basis. The next slide, please. So obviously, school children and school impacts are usually the paramount issue in a community when a residential development is proposed, and we have some preliminary findings that we'll be reviewing with the school superintendent. I have a database of over 1,000 units that I use to estimate school impacts for apartment buildings. This data has very specific numbers associated with what type of units there are, be it a two-bedroom, three-bedroom, if it's affordable, if it's market rate. And based on that analysis, we're estimating from the 340 apartments, approximately 49 school children. It's important to note that 54% of these units will be studio or one-bedrooms, which generate few school-aged children. The spread based on what we've seen in some existing apartment complexes in town, not surprisingly, is 62% will be elementary grade level, 27% middle, and 11% high school. These children will be spread out amongst the grades. We typically do not see, a high concentration in one grade. In fact, the profiles that I have from some apartment complexes in town, I think the biggest grade that students are in are 2 or 3 at the most. We also looked at 3 new apartment buildings in the community to get an idea of what's happening locally. Beaverbrook, the Kinnock, the Millet 3, that totals 360 units of our new apartments that were recently built, and there are 37 school children living in those 3 complexes, which gives you a ratio of 0.103 student per unit. If we use that ratio and apply it to the proposed development, we're looking at 35 school children. So we believe that there will be a range of between 35 and 49 school children residing at this new facility, new development at build-out. One of the things we also have been looked at is the alternative design scenario for this site is single-family homes. And based upon a project that's a few years old, it says in the community, it's brand new single-family homes with a high price point, mostly 4-bedrooms homes reside there. And based on that, there are over 20 children on that street. Looking at that ratio, it's almost 1.4 children per home. And with the estimated 22 school children, 22 new homes that could be built on that site, we're estimating 32 school children from a single-family home development on the property. So there isn't a huge difference between the low end of the scale of the estimate and a single-family home development as far as school impacts. Obviously, I'll be discussing those findings with the school superintendent to get an idea of what's happening in the school system, what type of costs might be incurred, and I'll be having similar conversations with the fire chief and the police chief. I have emergency call data that I've collected from 2 of the apartment complexes in town and my own database that I will be sharing with them to go over those findings. So I think my report will be completed within a few weeks, which will show obviously the revenues, but then also what type of cost impacts may happen with this development. Be happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. Thank you.
Anybody want to start with questions? Mike?
Anybody? Nope, not here.
Henry?
All right, I have a couple questions. Our housing affordable. I know you're doing the 55 units for the Chelmsford Housing Authority. What is this going to give us a basic level playing field that we don't gain anything, we don't lose any ground?
Do you mean against the SHI?
Yes, affordable housing.
Yeah. So right now, Choice as a function of the overall project, comprises about 13% of affordable. So at 10%, which is the SHI, the project is moving beyond. It's not just saying in lockstep. The feedback that we've received from the planning and select boards in our site meetings is that you'd like to see the site be at 15%. And so we will be doing additional units on our side of the development to hit the 15%.
So the question is, the 390 some odd units being rental units do not count towards our affordable at all?
They would not unless there was 25%. I'll defer to Melissa on that, but they are unit for unit when you're under 25%. When you're at 25%, you get the entire development's unit count applied as both the denominator and the numerator in the calculation.
Yes, and I can answer that as well. So as Mark has stated, what will happen is the town will get a 5% net benefit because the 10% obviously will go towards your 10% housing stock. So you are creating 5% additional. Henry, if I may, I think what you're asking is, can we count any of the market rate units? Can we count the entire project? And in a project like this, you cannot, because there is not the level of affordability throughout the project. They'd have to be dispersed throughout the project, just like any other 40B project that you've seen. And if it's not done that way, then they can't, all of them cannot be counted. But the 15% units will be counted.
All right, well, it gives me pause whether to support it or not. With this board, the planning board has worked many years and really hard to try to get that number down, to get to the 10%, so it gives me pause. That's it for me for now.
Nancy?
No questions at this time.
Paul?
No questions.
Ken? Deirdre?
No.
Kim?
Nothing at this time.
And I don't have any additional.
Okay, thank you. And the last slide, I'll let Melissa kind of run with this, is in terms of talking through the timeline and the procedure to entitle this site, working with the town via the new laws that have been enacted by Governor Baker. We've talked through or proposed some milestone dates for the next steps. And I'll let Melissa expand on this.
So really this timeline is keeping with your warrants, your regular town meeting warrant. I had proposed that Evan and I could start working on a draft if that's what this joint board would direct us to do at the end of this meeting. I tagged that for 2 weeks out from now. And then I gave this board some time to look at that so they could comment back. Also, I think that the department heads should have a chance to look at that draft. So you can see I scheduled some time for that as well. And then once those are all integrated, the board comments to come back to another joint boards meeting to see if that's something that the board would want to support. And if that was the case, then we would go back to the normal town meeting warrant timeline. I used the citizens petition timeline, which is August 2nd, which I know we don't have to. If the planning board were to support this, we could have a little bit more time there. But using the August 2nd deadline, then we would be into the planning board and the board of selectmen process with the citizens petitions. And then we would have up to October 18th to get a final document on the town meeting warrant for approval. So that's the timeline that I've followed. Obviously, there's lots of other options here. We can have a little bit more time between the August 2nd deadline and the actual town meeting. If the planning board puts this on the town meeting warrant, which I suspect that the planning board would if it's supported. And also there's an option of having a special town meeting within regular town meeting if we need additional time, if we're getting to the deadlines. And that's something we can look at as well. Really, this is a general timeline to get us started right now. And really the next thing after the board comments tonight and we are sent on our way is we should look at what an overlay would look like that could support a project like this. I suspect that it would look much like the COID bylaw in form, and then Evan and I could work on the meat of it prior to the next joint boards meeting if that's something the board would want to see. So really, this is the timeline to stay on the October town meeting agenda. And as you can see, just a note at the bottom there is to the affordability, but Mr. Parley's already asked that question, so I will skip that. But I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding the proposed timeline.
Okay, let's go around again. I'll start this way. Ken?
I don't have any questions on the timeline.
Okay. Deirdre?
I don't have any questions on the timeline, but I guess I want to go back to Henry's question, and I'm a little confused, and I apologize, I was a couple minutes late because I had connectivity issues, I think, from the thunder.
That's okay.
But Melissa, you had just mentioned that the zoning will be something akin to the CEO at IOD. My understanding is that zoning requires 25% affordable. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that wouldn't be as to the affordability level.
Okay.
I'm saying would try to use the structure, perhaps, of the overlay, but not the meat of it. The meat of it would be specific for this project.
Okay, so it's just going to be a special overlay for this project, and it won't be. I mean, so the state regs that you were reaching out to see if this project applied for, they don't have any requirement insofar as affordability?
They do have some requirements as to affordability, but they are generally 10%. And also that economic development legislation that we're still trying to find out if we're an eligible location, which hopefully we'll find out soon. They also require by right zoning of 15 units per acre. So if they find that we're an eligible location and we go forward with this project, obviously we won't be at the state requirement of 15 units per acre, but would have to enter some sort of memorandum of agreement with the town that we would be going into this overlay, but building a lesser per unit per acre.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Paul? Do?
That 10% that's going to be required, can you
Can you
count
get
the senior?
close to the microphone?
Can you count the affordable senior housing in that 10%?
Yes. Yeah,
On your end?
even with what, yes, and even with what we're proposing right now, we're saying that 15% of these units, the 15% of the units will count on your SHI inventory for affordable housing, just not the entire project will count.
So, can I ask a quick question? I mean, my background's not planning board, and so I'm going to ask maybe Henry for you to clarify. So they're saying 15%, but you said we were working towards 10. How does this hurt?
10% over the entire town.
Right. Where are you going to get
Now,
15% of this project?
If you look at like the project that we did on Turnpike,
Right.
well, it was controversial. They were apartment buildings. We got the percentage in there. We got the count, the whole project. 15% of 400 units, you're getting 50 on the, so you get 50, 60 units. That's what I'm looking at.
Right. So you're saying you want the whole thing?
Well, if the whole thing counted towards our inventory, it'd make a heck of a lot of difference. It would make it so that we wouldn't have people looking to do more 40B development in this
Got
town
it.
for a long
So
time.
15's good, but you want 100 would be great. That's what you're saying.
100 would be phenomenal.
Got it. Okay. I just needed to understand where you're.
But, I'm just looking at all the time and effort that we've put into getting to 10% in this town. The
Yep.
fight we've had.
So Ken, if I may interject, if 25% of the units are affordable, then the whole 100% counts.
I get that.
So we're getting to 15 and we get 15.
Yeah.
Right.
But if we got to 25,
You get 100.
we granted 100.
Now,
Just to point to that, Deirdre, no, in this instance, they wouldn't count because as designed, these units will not be interdispersed throughout the entire project.
you're still going to want a zoning change for this.
So
Thank you.
in order for the entire project to count, you would have to interdisperse the units throughout the project. What we're proposing is to have a 62 and over component that's run through choice. That's a separate component from the rest of the development.
Yeah. I honestly.
That's what we're proposing.
But sorry.
I honestly.
Thank you for that clarification.
I honestly believe we're going to have numbers in front of us explaining explaining it all. If we're gonna bring this to town meeting, we have to do our homework.
Yes.
We have to know what this is gonna cost you to build this, what it's costing you to do what you're doing. If we're just gonna take and say, yeah, we're gonna throw up a 55 and old development on the end, and we're not getting the 100% that we got with like Chuck Emanuel's project, with the Turnpike Road project, I can see this being a tougher sell.
But on the flip side, we have a huge backlog of senior housing that's needed for
I understand.
low income that this would
I understand.
put a dent in, right? If I understand it correctly.
But these aren't really being structured as senior housing, they're being structured as family housing.
So,
Even the choice piece?
Maybe the choice.
yeah,
But
but
in general, it's being structured as,
we,
you know,
we,
2 and 3
we
bedrooms.
I believe we're gonna have to have some real numbers and some real facts to go to town meeting. Just on that instance, like, yes, we're given a piece of property, it's worth X. We're doing this, it's worth X. You said something about $1,200 a year to choice. It's all gotta be laid out, and there's gotta be, we're asking for a zoning change. By right, this is allowed single-family homes. I just don't want to give away too much. I mean, I like the idea of the project, I think the project is generally favorable, but there's some things that have to be done, as far as I'm concerned, but that's why we're getting down in the meat and potatoes of this and going through it. I don't think if they throw us something that says, here, take this, I may push back a little. That's my only comment.
Paul, were you going to say something?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay.
Did you want
Go ahead, Nancy.
I guess I'm confused because I've been under the impression that single property spot zoning was not legal. And
This wouldn't be considered spot zoning, Nan. This would be an overlay. And it could be used in other areas of town. We would craft something and it could be used in other areas. It could be that's why I keep mentioning back to the COA. I'm sorry, I think Evan unmuted at the same time and I spoke over him. So Evan, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, I think the spot zoning is kind of a misnomer. Case law pretty clearly indicates that if it consists of one property, but the property is of a significant size compared to a typical property and is of a unique character based upon other properties in town, then it could be a single property zoning district and or overlay. So I don't think out of the gate, I don't think there's any concern with a 35-acre property of which 22 acres are developable being viewed as a single zoning district or zoning overlay.
Well, I have a question. If you can see some members have a little bit of issue, is there a way to take a look at that and see if there's any flexibility in affordable units?
I think what I'm hearing is that we need to be, I wouldn't say transparent, because we're not transparent, we just haven't gotten to the point where we get in great detail on the numbers. I think we have to get in great detail on the numbers. That's what I'm hearing, which is perfectly
That's
reasonable.
what I'm asking.
Yeah, and that's perfectly reasonable. At stage, what we've figured out, I would say to 95% certainty, is the site plan. From the site plan, everything else now kind of branches out. And so I think we can start to tighten up the numbers. I think what you probably want to see is a timeline of the development on when things are coming online, different parts of the project, including the Choice project. So I think that's something we can also do quite easily. And I think if there's the discussion on the affordables, we can have that discussion. I don't see the economics of getting to enough affordability on the project such that the entire project would be affordable. That would require really rejiggering the project, and I don't know if it would allow Choice to be involved. I'm not sure. I'd defer to Melissa on that.
Can I make a suggestion, which may be wrong, may be right? I mean, you got multiple buildings on the property. Would it be possible to get one of the buildings as affordable separate from the other buildings to get to count the whole building? I don't know, I'm just thinking.
Yeah, I would
out loud.
defer, I defer to
I'm
Melissa. I
not-
don't think you can, I think that's.
You have to mix 'em.
Can't be done. It has to be
You gotta mix 'em.
fully
Required to be.
dispersed.
That's correct. Mark, you're correct, that it has to be interdispersed throughout the project.
But that
In
isn't
order
to
to count.
say, that isn't to say that we can look at adding incrementally more affordables than we are. The number that I heard at meetings was that everyone wanted, or not everyone, I heard 15% as a desired affordability ratio on the property, and that's what we've been responding to. If there's desire for a higher ratio, I mean, ideally, I'd love if somebody said, gee, this is what we want, and then we can run the numbers and respond to you.
Yeah, I just, we gotta sell this at town meeting.
No, I understand, yeah, I understand. So you know, like I said, I think getting more detailed in the actual numbers of the deal is something we can do, and we can turn around on that in fairly short order.
If I could go back to Nan's question, my sense is, so I lost lock on why we need an overlay versus just rezoning. But that said, my sense is there's still some level of discomfort on whether we can legitimately just do an overlay in this one area. And so it may be appropriate just to sanity check that through town council.
Well, let me comment there. I don't think what's being proposed is an overlay for that area. It's an overlay.
But that's the question.
No, it's not for that, as I understand Melissa. But
I understand, but what's the harm in having council just sanity check?
Oh, we could certainly, he's going to sanity check the whole thing anyway, and that's
Before
probably
we
a
get
good
too
thing to
far
do.
down the
Before we
road.
get too far down the road. But I do have a concern in that area,
Okay?
which is, if we do, presumably we do an overlay, that looks like the obvious bylaw way to handle this. I think we need to be particularly careful. Obviously, an overlay does not generally convey unobstructed rights. I mean, it's usually all involves, special permits and what have you. However, an overlay does offer a model that then a lot of people may look at if they want to apply this kind of project to other areas of town. So designing an overlay, even though it would apply, say, to all, I don't know, what is it, CB? Or whatever, or excuse me,
Single family.
RBs? RCs, whatever. Coming up with an overlay that would apply to all such areas of town is going to take a little more thought than just looking at this one particular plot. And I think we have to get that one right from the get-go, otherwise we'll have some unintended consequences.
Yeah,
Just to provide some additional perspective, I've always viewed this as a project-based zoning proposal done via a project-specific overlay district. I don't view this as being applied to anywhere but this property. And it would be, as I mentioned, a project-based zoning proposal. So once a site plan and a general layout and program on number of units, heights, locations, parking ratios, open space are agreed upon based upon a picture, that's what the zoning would require. It would basically take a map and transfer it into zoning text. And what town meeting would be voting on would essentially be the project. So there would not be any surprises. And as we've discussed, in order to put on additional belts and suspenders, this process can involve MOUs, development contracts that are all negotiated and presented at town meeting, so that it is very, very predictable.
So if I understand what's being said here, we are not talking about an overlay district that would apply beyond this particular property.
I'm not envisioning that.
Okay.
Well, if we can do that, and that's where we have to ask the question.
That's where council needs to weigh in earlier rather than later, I think, before we expend all this energy.
Oh, I don't think there's a huge fear, but we certainly should get it to them as soon as we can.
I think we also have to be careful in terms of overlays and special permits, because at the point that a project like this comes under special permits, we're subject to having a host of citizens come in and complain that they don't want it done. And then we're in the position again of evaluating the project benefits against the citizen desires not to build.
So again, I think Melissa may have spoken to some of this, and it's good that we're spending some extra time on the kind of the zoning details. My understanding is that per the new state zoning provisions that Melissa's referring to, not only because the proposal would require a minimum of 10% affordability, in exchange, the new state zoning amendments allow a simple majority vote at town meeting. But my other understanding is that that would be a by right, not a special permit zoning provision.
That's correct, and it has to be by right of 15 units per acre. That's why I was responding to Deirdre's question as to how we would do this smaller project under that provision, and we would do it through using an MOU to make sure that the town actually got the project that we were putting forward.
Okay.
So this
And then, but
so-
the town would still then get the benefit of satisfying the economic development legislation.
Right, so once we get confirmation from council that a property-specific overlay is legal, the zoning becomes kind of, the details of the zoning become secondarily important. It's really the project, the site plan, the specifics on the housing, the specifics on affordability, public benefits, things of that nature, off-site and on-site public benefits, connectivity, that are being discussed and essentially pre-negotiated to present at town meeting. The zoning, unlike a COID or a 129 overlay or a Center Village overlay, where town meeting was being asked to adopt zoning in which there wasn't a specific project being proposed. So there were a lot of what-if scenarios. Again, I envision this to be project-specific. Town meeting, while they'll be voting on adopting a zoning overlay, simultaneously will be receiving a detailed and comprehensive presentation on the project that will be proposed and permitted via that town meeting vote. But my point is, people need to understand that if the town is interested in checking the box via the new state zoning provisions, then what we're talking about this evening on the zoning strategy being by right is a requirement. And there are, pros and cons and carrot and stick approach that the state is using to incentivize communities to do business under the new zoning provisions.
Just so the board knows, Evan did make that request to the state right after our last joint boards meeting, so we expect that we should have an answer from the state soon. They say that they are going to respond within 30 days, so their 30 days is almost run. So hopefully we'll have an answer on whether or not this is an eligible location for the town of Chelmsford soon.
All right.
And again, just to follow up, they were particularly interested in the LRTA bus routes and getting a better understanding, so I've provided that information. You've heard this evening that was something that the project proponents spent some time researching as well. So I fully expect that based upon that initial conversation that the site will be deemed eligible. The second part of this, again, not to overcomplicate it, is this separate MBTA provision. Ideally, that would be something that this site also could be eligible for. and check likely a mandatory box that the town would need to comply with. So I would keep that in mind as well, that that MBTA provision is something that's kind of hanging out there. The state is in the process of surveying communities and creating some guidelines and further detailed requirements. But that, as I mentioned, that is something that very likely, whether it's this project or a different zoning circumstance, the town is likely going to have to comply with. And this may be a good opportunity to check that mandatory box while also accommodating a project-based by right zoning proposal.
Okay. Let's finish the first round around the table. Did you have anything more, Mike?
No, that covers me.
Tim?
I don't have anything at this time.
I had a couple things relative to the timeline. Paul Cohen, could you remind me, when's the actual deadline for warrant articles?
If we're accurate, it's August 2nd.
No, it's not. That's
sorry.
citizen petitions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't want to... It's in September or something, isn't it?
The select board is scheduled to sign the warrant for the fall annual town meeting on September 13th.
Okay.
We really would need everything finalized by Labor Day to get it through council and then
Okay.
in the board's packets for it to be signed on the 13th.
So, I mean, here's... my general concern is I think this is a very aggressive timeline, and it's something new. And I really would like to make sure that adequate time is taken to scrub it through the planning board process before something goes on to the warrant article. When it's rushed to the warrant before the planning board is ready, it can be worked, but it's messy. It's messy for amendments, for town meeting reps, it's messy for the public, it's messy for the boards. So I would prefer to see as much done through the planning board before it ever lands on the warrant, is my personal preference. The timeline says draft comments submitted by board members, and then we get together later to see what you did with the comments. I'm just dealing with something else under open meeting law, and I would appreciate it if we could just get a sanity check from council that we can do it that way, and that we don't have to bring our comments to a meeting to talk about. I know there's different rules depending who the comments go to, but I would like to sanity check that that's a legitimate way for these boards to do that, just so that we keep it clean. And then my other comment is, I know that as the warrant article is going to be drafted, you will have public input through the planning board. I would consider whether you want to have some kind of public input on your timeline earlier in the process, so that the drafting is informed by public input rather than drafting it and getting public input on something that you might consider near final. Especially since this is so new and there's so many abutting neighborhoods and people across town that might want to have comments. So those are my comments on the timeline.
Sure, and I'll defer to Melissa on the details with council. In terms of public input meetings, I think we're looking for guidance from the people right here to tell us what you want us to do. We're amenable to that. We can drive that process. We just need...
I would defer more to the planning board on that, because you guys are going to be in the heat of drafting it.
Yeah.
But my thought was it might be nice for you to have public input before you...
My opinion is, Tim...
Can you get closer to the mic?
My opinion is, Tim, that we gotta have some hard numbers to work with. And when the hard numbers are here, we can explain, but we gotta have...
How about the public input, though, for a
But
timeline?
you still, you gotta have your numbers before you start doing the stuff. So as soon as they have the numbers to us, as soon as we can get started on it, as painful as it'll be, we need to get started with it.
Yeah.
Well, we can certainly start doing that.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any other comments?
We just gotta have something to sell to the town.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The $1 million sounds all great and everything else, a million something, whatever it is, but, you know, the town, this goes to the town meeting. You know, I don't know how it's gonna fall.
Any other comments or thoughts? Paul or Evan, do you have anything else?
I'll offer some comments. I think what Henry may be referring to is a pro forma, although that wasn't really the term that was used. And again, I don't want to put words in Henry's mouth, but I think it's important to have clarification. Are you looking for financial reasons as to why the project can or cannot, or under what form it could provide 25% affordability?
A performer would be good. I believe that we've got to sell it to the town meeting. And we've got to take and go up and say, this is why we're doing it for the town, and this is the benefits for the town. You even touched on it with, you know, with the COID, we got to show some benefits to the town. And, you know, we've just had a couple of meetings about landscaping and the thing's got to look right. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of information that has to be digested on the applicant side, on our side. We've got to come up with something that works for the neighborhood, the town, and everything else. It's not always the easiest thing, and it's going to take a few meetings to get by.
Oh, indeed.
How long did it take to develop other overlays?
6 months.
6 months, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, is this feasible as an overlay for fall town
Even
meeting?
with the summer, with vacations and
imagine
everything
it.
else, and members being
No.
present for every meeting, but.
The planning board has done really good about somehow or another scrounging up enough people that we
Yeah.
always have somebody there.
Yeah.
The problem is, if you miss a few meetings, then all of a sudden you can't vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets nasty. And I would say in this particular case, how quickly the planning board can react is going to depend more than anything else on the quality of the initial plan that's presented to us. If we get something that a bunch of people have thought hard about before it hits our desk, it's got a much better chance than if we have to kind of piece it together as we go.
Yeah, well.
So that's why the process, as Melissa proposed, is laid out the way it is. And I'm interpreting, Mike, your comments to be about, you know, town officials providing technical comments to identify and resolve any red flags related to infrastructure, fire, police,
Yeah.
things of that nature. My final clarification is, if we were able, we collectively, however that's defined, were able to come to a conceptual project via either a narrative and/or a plan, a graphic, writing the zoning to match that is very, very straightforward. As I mentioned, it's a project-based rezoning. So what I'm hearing tonight is that people want to put the zoning first. What really needs to take place in this particular instance is an agreement, a conceptual agreement on what is the project. So I think Henry's on the right track. If I understand what Henry's trying to accomplish, is prove to us that you can't accommodate more affordability, and if you can, what would the project look like at that point? So, you know, and again, I don't want to speak for Henry, but Henry seems to be prioritizing, at least out of the gate, more affordability rather than less affordability or 15% affordability. And Henry did mention, because he has enough experience, that at the end of the day, it's a balancing act. While one may prioritize 25% affordability so that 100% of the 400 units count towards SHI, Henry also knows that projects that provide 25% affordability may not be able to provide other benefits. So that's the piece that I think these two boards, working with the proponent, need to massage and mold a project then once the project and the framework of that project is agreed upon, the zoning kind of falls in place naturally, because it's directly following the predicted outcome of a agreed upon project.
Can I ask the
I'm
applicant,
sorry.
can I have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Has there been any outreach to the neighborhood or the butters on?
Thanks for that question. Yes, we have done a mailing to all the certified abutters, and we've also met with some of the groups directly. We've had quite a few meetings, in fact, on site. We've not reached everyone. Full disclosure, there's still people we need to hunt down and talk to. Frankly, this past spring, it wasn't easy because of COVID. You can't really knock on someone's door the way you used to be able to. I think, in particular on Whiteman Street, there's people that want to understand the traffic report, and I've spoken with those people, and now that we have a report, that'll be a next step for us. There are details that I think the Meadowwood and Windermere communities want to understand about fencing and green buffers and elevation views. And again, those are things we know we have to address. Until we pin down the site plan, we're just, it's kind of, you're all over the map. I feel that this site plan is what we want to do, and so I don't know if I'm asking the planning board and the select board for review of the site plan to move forward. I don't know if that's the correct process, but we think this is the right mix and location of various buildings, and so now I need civil to kind of dig in. We've already had an arborist down on the site. We know that the buffer is very, very important to the abutters. We've done an assessment of the trees because some aren't healthy, and even when you tell people that you're not going to touch a tree and then there's a dead tree and you touch it, we don't want that misunderstanding to occur. So we've already engaged an arborist to identify what trees may have to be removed in that buffer. So I would say we've done a lot of work. We have more work to do. This feels like this is kind of the next big step into getting back into the field and talking to abutters.
Thanks.
Paul, did you want to say something?
Yeah, again, I'm not going to wade into the zoning waters because the planning board and Evan are more adept at that. My only thought would be is you probably have an extra month if you wanted. My sense is if you wanted to bring this in the fall, town meeting's going to end at the end of October, but realistically, you could do a special probably before Thanksgiving. I think once you hit Thanksgiving, you're into next year, and so I don't know that 3 or 4 weeks would really matter in terms of the timing for your project. Because I agree, rushed is not going to be a good outcome, but that's the extent of my perspective in terms of zoning and what can be achieved. The planning board and Evan have a better sense of what's realistic. What I will comment on is the financial aspects, because that's a little more my bailiwick. I guess the question I'd have, and I'd be curious, is really the impact on the school children. I don't know what number you're going to assign per cost per student, and that's going to be interesting because my understanding is this particularly the elementary schools are getting more and more crowded. Remember, we added modular units there, and so I think there will be a sensitivity, and you'll probably hear that directly when you speak to the superintendent of schools in terms of where the students from this proposed development going to attend schools. But as we know, we're approaching $20,000 the average cost of $20,000 per student to educate a child in the community and really in the Commonwealth when the time this units would be occupied. So again, your $1 million of revenue could be easily offset by educational costs. But I'd also postulate that you could have the same impact if it's built under the allowed zoning. If you have 22 single-family homes, 4 bedrooms, that's probably that is a net loser in that respect, because you do the same analysis as you could indicate. If you take the assessed value for a single-family 4-bedroom homes on that property and then assign the number of children for a 4-bedroom home, that's probably more of a financial loser. But I just don't want people walking away watching this video or reviewing the materials thinking that the town's going to net $1 million in net revenue from this. It's not. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's not going to happen. So in other words, I don't want this project to be viewed in the prism of a moneymaker for the town, because I don't think that, and that really ought not to be, what the decision is based upon. The question is really going to be by the neighborhood and community and the town is, do we want this development in the community and what it brings? And as Evan said, there are some ancillary benefits, such as the requirements that are coming from the state given that we are an MBTA community, and what are our requirements going to be there, which we don't know at the time. And then the only other thing I would add on your revenue component is, you do sort of, and I know it's a hard thing, you do identify direct revenue costs. I mean, you haven't thrown in there, for example, what the permit fees would be, which would be a one-time revenue for the town, building permits, electrical and so forth. And also, there's got to be, there will be some other tangential revenues to the community, because if you've got this number of people living there, then obviously there's going to be an increase to the town in meals tax and so forth. So I'm trying to be even-handed in my comments in terms of what I would expect you would see as you flush out your analysis. Clearly, there's one-time permit fees, and then, I'm not asking to get into multiplier effects on economics, but clearly there would be an economic benefit in the community from the people who are residing at that location. So those are my initial thoughts this evening.
Yeah, and just to respond briefly, our analyst, Mark Fougere, has looked at the as-of-right single-family option on the economics, the fiscal side. It's not fully tapped up, but, I think you're accurate in that the impact of school children vis-a-vis what the likely inflows of capital are for taxes and other, it's not very favorable, but we'll let those numbers get further vetted out. I agree that, we typically do emphasize things like permit fees because those are big chunks of money coming into the town. I don't know that they're always addressed in the fiscal report, but we can certainly add those.
Can I ask another?
Yeah, absolutely.
One other question, is there any thought to doing mixed use there, or is that it wouldn't work in that situation? Seeing it in other towns, residential and then commercial also, and
two responses. I guess the first response is Trammell Crow Residential. We don't really do mixed-use developments. We don't know retail. There are some situations across the country where it's required by zoning. So we will do it because we have to, but we will typically underwrite that space as creating no economic value. Making it work in this setting, it doesn't feel like it would make a lot of sense, to be perfectly honest. From just a planning perspective, it would change the dynamics of traffic. I don't see that.
yeah, no worries. I didn't know if it was something you looked at one time, but that's fine.
It isn't something we look at as a rule, because that's not the lenses that we see the world through. But in this case, as someone who's developed all over eastern Massachusetts, I don't see this as a location that it would make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Can I ask a planning board type questions for my own edification? So you have 528 non-affordable, or whatever, market rate, I think is what you call it, and you have 40 choice that are going to be for affordable seniors, right? Would you, or could you, or would it work, using density numbers, whatever, to say to them, you get 528 units, we would rather you go to 635 and take 107 of those and make them affordable and get rid of the choice? Is that where is that where you want to go with this?
No. We usually do a pro forma, and the numbers shake out. And usually, we have David Hedison, which probably wouldn't be the one to take and do the pro forma on this, where his own development's gonna make on it. But usually, we have to do a pro forma.
What I'm asking is, would you guys rather see 600 units instead of 5 and make it affordable and count all numbers? Or would you rather see 5?
What I'd rather see is 5 units over there, but that ain't gonna happen. But if you're doing a large development in town, I want to see it go toward, literally, how many years have we spent trying to get
Yeah.
up to the 10%?
10 years.
10 years. We made laws. We've had the people fighting 40B. That's why we did the COID.
Right, that's why I'm asking on those numbers, because if 500 units and not counting it versus 625 and counting it, is that
That's
a
the
benefit?
argument that we make all the time. We have to find middle ground somewhere, and that's why we have hearings. That's why we take and look at performers. That's why we look at public benefit, what are they gonna do for the town to help? And, you know, there's public benefit, there's money, we don't, as planning board, we don't really look at money. That's not our issue. Our issue is gonna be, what's the impact on the roads, what's the impact on the neighborhood? I mean,
Well, if this goes to town meeting, though, someone better approach money from us.
Oh, they will.
yeah, it will, but it's not, it doesn't come from us.
Right.
You're the guys who usually look at money more than we do.
Yeah, FinCom
Right.
analysis
Okay.
addresses the money. Ken, to your question, I mean, we could look at it in terms of, you know, bonus units for taking them affordable, whatever, but, you know, this development is so big, and we have had so much opposition to all of the multifamily developments over the past 5 years, that I think anything that takes it even bigger just increases the amount of opposition. It doesn't matter if you put together an analysis that says that the traffic won't be significant. It doesn't matter if you put together an analysis that says you're not going to put a burden on the schools or that we have enough water, because people are going to be scared of it. And this requires, by taking it to town meeting, this requires the public to weigh in heavily, and they will.
Any other comments?
But if it gets through town meeting, based upon their site plan and the pro forma and your numbers, that should make the planning board's job easier.
Oh, yeah.
Because then you know you have the support.
Very much so.
It will make the planning board's job a lot easier, but my question is, what is the story that the public is going to buy that says it's a benefit to Chelmsford to have more people? Because all I've heard for years now is that we don't want any more people in Chelmsford.
Okay.
That our resources can't handle it.
Well, the only town I've really seen that work well for is Carlisle, and their
I
property
get it.
taxes are, 60 grand a year.
That's exactly what it means,
Yep.
is, we have the opposition to more residents, we have the opposition to commercial industrial development, and it just continues to drive up the property taxes for single-family homes.
If I may, Madam Chair, just respond to that quickly. One wrinkle here that's a little different is the economic development legislation of 2020. Towns that are listed under there, like the town of Chelmsford, are most likely going to be required to comply with this program in order to get MassWorks grants and other types of grants in the future. So the town is going to have to check a box. This project may check that box. So when you're talking about what's the benefit to the town of Chelmsford and what's different about this project, that could be it.
And the
great.
senior housing.
That's something
Yeah.
that you can
Yeah.
use at town meeting, so that's perfect.
Yeah.
And to interject, I mean, I think it's the responsibility of our team to summarize this in a way that makes a lot of sense, that
Yeah.
the concerns and getting a pro forma, going through the numbers, having everyone understand why this is an economic driver and why we think it is an overall net benefit to the town of Chelmsford.
I think you may also find, if you have some early public input, that you will actually have people from the public who are supportive of this one.
Yeah.
And
I
they'll
suspect
they'll
there
have
will
the
be.
opportunity to
Yeah,
explain
there will
why
be.
they're supportive of it to the rest of the town. Paul, were you wheeling up to say something?
No, the only thing I would note is, in terms of the affordable housing thing, is by the time this hits town meeting, we should have our new affordable housing number under the census. We should have that probably in September when they come out with the population data. It'll also give us our housing number, which will be the number that will be in effect for the community for the next 10 years. And so therefore, again, that'll be another known that we don't know tonight, which going to the point of what's our affordable housing requirement, and then where do we stand going into this project. So that will be helpful as we approach that as well. And also by that time, as Melissa's is noting that we should have more clarity on the state requirements, because as Evan noted, we received an email today on a survey from the state asking about the compliance with the new state requirements under the Housing Act, because this, and I understand exactly what you're saying, Nancy, because we hear it as well, but yet you've got a governor who's touting housing construction. And of course, we were on a,
We're caught in the middle of it.
right, we're caught in the middle.
We just got done checking all the boxes.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And
We got
you know,
a thing from that, from Middlesex government for 129
Exactly.
down here fixing up. We've done a lot.
And I was on a call this morning with the DEP screaming about sewer infrastructure, you know, in terms of what's the big picture, because that, you know, obviously this is gonna have an on-site facility, but the big picture is how can you request additional housing if we don't have the infrastructure to support it? In mass, not for this project, but those are the conflicting constraints that we have as a community.
Can I ask a question, Paul? It's
Yeah.
Deirdre here.
Yes, Deirdre.
I'm just wondering about the, if you have an idea
Yep.
of the percentage, is that something that's out of line? Like, do you think we're gonna be above 10% with the new number?
Evan and I have, and I really was trying to Evan because he really was the more critical, the initial author of the analysis, but we think we're going to be at the 10% threshold. But again, we're waiting to see the official numbers, because that's, but I think, Evan, we'll be slightly over 10% is our expectation.
Yeah, it's, our projections are just over 10% by single digits. I think NIMCOG's estimate that they put in the draft 2020 master plan update in the housing section has us digits under 10%. So it's plus or minus. And again, this is all part of the kind of the balancing act that I think Henry's alluding to is, you know, what do you prioritize? As opposed to, are you trying to prioritize a number of issues or a wide spectrum of issues? You know, all of those levers that you push and pull have a direct correlation to the number of units, the type of units, how many bedrooms, what's the bedroom mix, and ultimately what are the impacts financially and otherwise.
So it sounds like it's gonna be a squeaker. And then, I guess, excuse my ignorance, but how, I mean, obviously, we can't not do anything for 10 years. Like, how do we just have to,
No.
on an ongoing basis,
No,
keep?
what happens, Deirdre, is that number remains constant for 10 years, so that denominator stays constant even as housing gets built over the 10-year period. But as we add to our subsidized housing inventory by the state, that as soon as we cross that 10% threshold, we have safe harbor. So basically, we'll have a 10-year safe harbor. The question is what are you setting yourself up for, given what the
10
laws,
years, huh?
what the laws might be in 10 years and where society may be? That's certainly a big unknown. But no, once that denominator or that base number will stay constant for the 10-year period.
That's why we have the COID, so that we can
Exactly.
do, or the.
Exactly.
The only
TIF
caveat,
program and other stuff that you guys have.
Yeah, I mean, the projections that we presented to both these boards in the community at the time assumed, or made an assumption that 400 units at UMass West, that all 400 would count towards our SHI. If that were the case, then 40B would be done basically for the next decade. You wouldn't have to worry about what you approved, what you didn't approve. Alternative scenarios, if it were 200 units that counted, you know, maybe that takes care of you for half a decade. We have safe harbor and don't necessarily, again, need to be itemizing each and every project as part of a calculus as to whether you are going to continue to comply with the 10% ratio. And as proposed, it's a third scenario.
Okay, so in terms of this project, what would the planning board like to see next?
Numbers.
Yeah, numbers.
Numbers, pictures, drawings.
More public input like you're doing, which I think is great, because that takes up
Maybe
a
in
lot
the
of time
public.
and, yeah. as we know.
They gotta have something to see.
Yeah. Yep.
Is there anything in anybody's, from a planning board standpoint, is there anything we should be aware of that is in the back of your mind as a concern that we should spend some time educating ourselves or thinking about as select board members? Is there anything, even if it's something small in the back of your mind that's like, oh, this could be a problem later?
I've pretty much got all my feelings out tonight.
Evan, do you think there's anything we should be looking at with the select board?
Just based upon tonight's discussion, I think the most important part of this process is process. There's a reason that the proponent wanted to start this process with the two chief elected boards. And as was discussed this evening by board members, any path to town meeting and at town meeting is likely going to require both of these chief elected boards to indicate their positions and ultimately very likely support in order for town meeting to understand what's being proposed and what the benefits are to the community. So I think the next step is fairly important. And what I mean by that is we've heard tonight, bring us financials, and I'm assuming that means bring those financials back to the two boards and have a discussion, but I'm also hearing public input. And I struggle with, how do you do public input if you don't have a project? I think it's critical that these two boards, working with the proponent within a process that these two boards define, identify or try to achieve identifying a preferred project. Because otherwise you're going, if you're simply asking the proponent to go out and solicit public comment, there is no project, there is no agreed upon project right now, particularly where the primary ask from tonight's meeting is bring us the financials to see if there is an ability to create more affordability.
Well,
Excuse me, I think what I also heard from the planning board members was get down to another level of detail so we know what we're asking the public to comment on.
yeah, and I don't think we were all like, the project that they bring it forward is something that we could work with as far as I could see, but they've already reached out to the public, so they're doing it already.
They've reached out to the neighbors.
To the neighbors,
Yeah,
right.
It's different from the public.
Well, which is huge, though.
It is
because
very huge.
That is what's going to end up, they're going to end up bringing on more, and
Right.
getting more people involved, as we know. So that's a big step.
But you bring up a good point about the reach out, to the people that are watching this at home and the public present in the room tonight. It's really important you get the word out to your neighbors that this project's being considered, because the worst thing that happens that I've seen time and time again in projects that come, even signage in town, when we were doing the wayfaring signs, someone shows up the night of the vote and says, I have never heard anything about this, and I don't like the color scheme. And the brakes get slapped on and everybody starts over. So what you don't want is, you don't want someone showing up who's, probably a key decision maker, or someone who pulls weight in the community, or maybe even someone that just lives at the right spot and saying, this is the first time I heard about it. So, you got to get the word out. You got to tell your neighbors what's going on. You got to, come to the meetings. And I just can't beg people enough just to get involved, because, you got to remember these people are spending money too. They don't want to, spend $500,000 on this project, and then at the last minute have the whole thing blow up because people didn't get involved in the beginning. So get involved, give input, give feedback, tell your neighbors. And as a community, we should be able to look at this project to make a decision.
Yeah, I mean, and from my perspective as a developer, we want to get feedback from everybody. We can't say yes to everyone. That's probably pretty obvious. We'd like to say yes to most of the things, and we're reasonable. There's things we can give on, there's things we can't. If we don't know that those issues are out there, then we can't respond to them. So we want to engage as well, and we'll continue to do as much as we can with mailings and other forms of communication to make sure that's happening.
All right,
That's all I got.
All right.
Are you all set on your end, Mark?
If there are no further questions of the boards?
Mark,
Yes.
I do have a question. How many units are we talking of studios, one bedrooms, two bedrooms, three bedrooms?
Well, as Mark Fougere said earlier, the studios and ones comprise 54% of the overall unit mix. But if you go to page...
So how much of each?
Sorry, page 10 actually illustrates it much better. It's up on the screen now. Sorry.
I can't read it, hon.
Okay. Summary overall. Studios are 5%, there are 20. One beds, 54%, 218. Two beds, 32%, 131. And three beds, 9%, 25. That's for the overall project, including choice.
Okay.
And what is included in choice? Are those all one bedrooms or?
Let me
They're
find-
all 54 one-bedroom.
54 one beds, yeah. They're illustrated in the three-story, well, you can't see it, but in the column three-story elevator building. We should probably just tag that as choice, just to.
Yeah, right.
You all set, Nancy?
Yep, I am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take a
Thank you for your time.
Motion to continue or adjourn, that's it? Yeah, motion to
We're
adjourn.
adjourning this.
It's not technically a public hearing.
Sounds great, motion to adjourn.
You don't even have enough
Yeah.
people to adjourn.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Deirdre?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your time.